The Swedish government has decided to reopen an investigation into rape allegations against Wikileaks founder Julian Asange. This means Sweden will also seek his extradition alongside with the United States. However, British officials will decide which case takes precedence. The Swedish investigation started in 2010 after two women accused Assange of sexually assaulting them in Stockholm. The case was dropped in 2017 when Assange had entered the Ecuadorian embassy. Assange says he wants to collaborate with the investigation and clear his name. And the Attorney General of Ecuador has agreed to deliver all of Assange's personal materials to the United States, according to a report by the Spanish newspaper El País on Sunday. Assange's documents, mobile phones, computer files, memory units and other devices are inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he had been living for the past 7 years before being arrested in April. According to El País, on May 20th, Assange's sealed room will be open for police to seize all materials. Assange's lawyers say this is an absolute violation of the asylum institution. And in Ecuador, the Citizen Revolution movement is calling on authorities to investigate Swiss bank accounts allegedly linked to the wife of President Lenin Moreno. Our correspondent Denise Herrera has the details.
Since the accusations against him came to light through the INA Papers case, the Ecuadorian president has rejected any connection with the offshore company or alleged assets in tax havens. Opposition and government lawmakers are waiting on the unfolding matter.
We believe that he has made a good decision. We should remember that we've already denounced it, but we also want to clarify a few things. We are still very much interested. There is total transparency, and we are supporting the movement and our president's decision.
I think it was a good initiative that has taken a long time, but that must be the position of a president. We in the Fiscalization Commission have already finished our report that is now in the Legislative Administration Council, and we hope it will go to the Assembly very soon.
Meanwhile, the Citizen Revolution movement is questioning whether President Moreno is being as transparent as he claims to be. The lawmakers also are criticizing the General Prosecutor's office.
We strongly condemn any use of tax havens by public officials. It's prohibited by law. And this matter allegedly involving the head of the state is now in the hands of the Attorney General. It's clear this was a strategic move on the part of Moreno, because the evidence was presented many weeks ago, and what Moreno is doing right now is trying to appear transparent. But he has taken this stance only because the country is watching. Ecuadorians are outrightly rejecting corruption. The people are outraged that a president may be involved in illegal, corrupt activities.
During his tenure, President Moreno has been very emphatic in his disagreement with companies linked to tax havens. Now, the Citizen Revolution movement has requested that the authorities investigate bank accounts held by the president's wife in Switzerland. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Another social leader was killed last Saturday in Colombia. The social leader and anthropologist Luis Manuel Salamanca Galíndez, 64 years old, was shot outside his house. Local media say that unknown men shot him twice, causing him an immediate death. An investigation is being held. There has been 569 social leaders killed since the peace agreement in 2016. Social movement claim that Iván Duque's government is not taking any policies to stop the murders. The leader of the ELN's Camilo Cienfuegos Commission, Adalberto Fuentes Rangel, known as Darío, was killed in a combat against Colombian army troops on Saturday. Darío had been in the organization for more than 16 years, according to official information. He was 32 years old. And 3 other members of the National Liberation Army, who were part of his security team, were also captured in the same operation. South African President and African National Congress leader Cyril Ramaphosa thanked supporters for voting for his party. The ruling ANC has been declared winner of the general election in South Africa in a vote which was conducted peacefully for the most part. The ANC secured 58% of the vote, ahead of the Democratic Alliance, which received 21%. The economic freedom fighters came in third with 11%, with a leftist agenda garnering significant support. President Ramaphosa called on the people to build a united South Africa. And we spoke to political analyst Imran Bukus about the outcome of last week's election in South Africa.
The ANC has been in power for about 25 years, and the history of Africa teaches us that liberation movements that come to power start to get pushed to the periphery 2, 3, 4 decades into liberation or into democracy. So I think, what's happening to the ANC is not surprising. I think the ANC has long mobilized its liberation history to get votes, but I think that romance of the liberation is wearing out. So younger people are less interested in how long people were in the struggle and are more interested in, getting jobs, having the street lights working and the potholes fixed. But in South Africa, where the majority is a Black African population, and in a context where over 50% of South Africans are under 30, and the vast majority of that group is unemployed and desperately poor. And what the EFF uses is crude populism. And that populism that the EFF uses is seductive, is inviting, and I think really large numbers of young, particularly Black youth, are turning to the EFF.
Millions of voters in the Philippines have cast their ballots in the midterm elections that are expected to strengthen President Rodrigo Duterte's power in Congress. Voters elected 12 places in the 24-seat Senate. Polls show that candidates endorsed by Duterte are likely to win. There are 61 million voters who are also set to vote for 18,000 other positions in local governments and the House of Representatives.
It's very important to vote because this is for the younger generation who will also get to vote soon, like my children. I hope that they will do the same. Today we will vote for our new leaders and hoping that this could end corruption.
Saudi Arabia says 2 of its oil tankers have been attacked off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. The Emirates did not provide any information about the attack, only that 2 other vessels were sabotaged as well. Saudi officials condemned the attack as an attempt to undermine the security of crude supplies as tensions spike between the United States and Iran. Regional elections took place in Argentina prior to October's general election. The latest to vote was Córdoba State, one of the key districts for Mauricio Macri's triumph in 2015. Almost 3 million people went to the polls, 8.8% of voters registered nationally. The current governor, Peronist Juan Schiaretti, from the Federal Alternative Party, has won the re-election with more than 25 points against his main challenger. The election in Argentina's second biggest state means Macri's party is suffering its 8th defeat in 2019 alone. A congressman from Argentina has died from his wounds in the hospital 2 days after he was shot. Héctor Olivares was shot outside Congress following the same fate of another official, Miguel Marcelo Lladón, who died on the spot. The attackers were arrested, but the reasons of the murder are still unknown. After the shooting, police raided one of the aggressors' homes and found the weapon. Official sources say it was a random crime committed by a man who was drunk at the time. The government announced 2 days of mourning. More stories coming up. Don't go away.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get Your Body. Tuesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In Mexico, a group of migrants said to be deported escaped from an immigration center after a fire broke out. The fire was deliberately started overnight at the center in Tapanatepec, where over 100 Central American migrants were held, many of them awaiting deportation. No one was seriously injured, but officials couldn't yet determine the exact number of people who escaped. This comes as the Mexican president is shifting to a tougher tone on handling migrants heading to the U.S. The Caribbean Court of Justice has reserved judgment in the case of the Guyanese opposition's legal challenge against an appeal court ruling that had invalidated last December's no-confidence vote against the government. Over the past 2 days, the Trinidad-based court heard arguments from both sides. The government is claiming 34 votes were needed to pass the motion. The opposition had argued that it had established a figure of 33. In January, Guyana's High Court ruled in favor of the opposition, but an appeal court overturned that ruling. The CCJ, the country's highest and final appeal court, must now review submissions and hand down a decision at a later date. The government of Nicaragua has provided free tests and treatment to those living with HIV, reaching a record number of patients in 2019. The Vice President of Nicaragua, Rosario Murillo, announced Saturday that it was a successful year for tackling HIV. This year alone, over 100,000 people have been tested for free, 60% more than the same period in 2018. The number of patients has fallen and new cases were not detected among newborns. Vice President Murillo says this is thanks to our antiretroviral treatment given for free, despite new U.S. sanctions on the country.
En la atención directa de nuestro pueblo.
Llevarlo a enfermedades prevalentes. Alegre.
The Embassy Protection Collective remains anchored to Venezuela's most important diplomatic office in the United States. Our correspondent, Alina Duarte, has been covering it from the ground.
Hello, good afternoon. We are outside the Venezuelan Embassy here in Washington, D.C., and I'm with Aminta. She's a member of the Embassy Protection Collective. Aminta, thank you so much for being with us. Tell us, why did you decide to be part of this collective?
Well, as a U.S. citizen and also somebody who is Nicaraguan and Palestinian, I see that the struggles that are happening within Venezuela are so similar to what I'm seeing here in D.C., and not just in D.C., but also in Nicaragua and in Palestine and internationally as a whole. And I just felt that as a U.S. citizen, it was crucial for me and others to call out the U.S. government for their disgusting, violent actions that only serve the cause of imperialism. And so, you know, after learning a lot about the Bolivarian Revolution, learning about, you know, the great strides that Chavez and Maduro have done in order to help the people of Venezuela, and considering the fact that 67% of Venezuelans voted democratically for Maduro, you know, it is just crucial to show all of our international support with those in Venezuela.
We have seen that the Venezuelan opposition have been threatening a lot of people, including you. How has been that?
I mean, it's really, I want to say that I'm shocked, but at the same time I'm not. I've seen the Secret Service, MPD, federal agents, they have all worked alongside the pro-US coup, pro-Guaido opposition people that are aiming to just establish and legitimize Juan Guaido, somebody that only 1 in 5 Venezuelans even knew about in their home country. And so, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that the State Department is working alongside with people who are fascists. These people outside, they have said anti-black slurs to us, anti-indigenous slurs, anti-LGBT slurs. They have sexual sexually assaulted people who have supported us and ourselves as well. They have also physically assaulted, some of our embassy protection members. They had huge bruises on their arms, and alongside not just with, directly physical forms of violence, these people have also permitted that food does not have any form of entry within the embassy within the last 2 weeks. They have cut off the water, they have cut off the electricity. Shame on PEPCO for working alongside with the U.S. State Department to engage in nefarious imperialist acts of violence.
Can you explain what PEPCO is and what happened? What's the situation now inside the embassy?
Definitely. So PEPCO is basically the company that just supplies water and electricity to the Venezuelan embassy, and the rightful owners of the embassy, under the legitimate government and administration of Nicolas Maduro, they paid the bill. We called, and even then they just read to us just like a scripted message, and so it is shame on PEPCO for just being another puppet of the empire.
And now that you are outside the embassy, what's your message to the Bolivarian people?
I am in complete and total solidarity with the Bolivarian people. The revolution continues to live. It has been such a beautiful progression. At first it was just a few of us, organizing and starting at the embassy, and to see this blossom and to see so much attention being garnered to it. Although, yes, we are fighting against the U.S. empire, I really do believe that truth prevails and that we will come out stronger than ever before. This is huge. The fact that U.S. Americans are taking over a foreign embassy within the heart of the capital, that has so much potential to change the ways in which the United States engages in its foreign policy. And so the Bolivarian Revolution lives on, and I am just so honored to be alongside with the people of Venezuela.
Thank you so much, Arminta. Well, we'll be reporting on this and more, and back to you to the studio.
Thank you, Alina Duarte from Washington. Now, international media is painting a false picture of the situation in Venezuela, according to journalist Eva Bartlett, who spoke to Telesur on Saturday.
The corporate media, the international media, is trying to sell to a Western public that the Venezuelan government is bad and we need to save them. It's extremely ironic and hypocritical, if I may, Camila, because the sanctions, as you mentioned at the beginning, are dramatically affecting Venezuelans' lives. We've seen a report by American economists recently saying 40,000 people from 2017 to 2018 have died as a result of the sanction, and hundreds of thousands more are at risk.
Bartlett also denied reports that there is chaos in the streets of Venezuela.
To the contrary, in Caracas, I saw they weren't guarimbas, but they were people setting up barricades and lighting them on fire in the middle of Caracas, and the police and the National Guard were allowing them to do this. And I was told by local journalists this was a form of protest in order to draw attention to a specific need they had. Now, not to be confused with guarimbas, which obviously you know well, but for viewers, the guarimbas are very violent street protests that attack civilians. But these particular ones were isolated, and I was told by local journalists that once their need is met, for example, a water tanker, the barricades are disassembled.
We're taking one last break. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. At least 6 people have been killed in an attack on a Catholic church in Burkina Faso. According to authorities, a group of attackers came into the church and began to shoot others while worshippers tried to flee. After the attack, the gunman reportedly burned down the church, then shops and a small restaurant. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. Sudan's military rulers have invited protest leaders to a second round of talks on transferring power to a civilian administration. The call comes as demonstrators remain camping outside the army headquarters in central Khartoum. They say they will continue to protest to force the generals to cede power to a civilian leadership. Talks have been deadlocked for days as protesters demand a civilian body to oversee the 4-year transition following the resignation of former President Omar al-Bashir. In Nigeria, former President Goodluck Jonathan has rejected bribery accusations against him. The government accused the former president and his then oil minister of accepting bribes to broker a $1.3 billion oil deal 8 years ago. Jonathan dismissed the claims as falsehoods and a cheap, predictable ploy by the government to tarnish his reputation. A pilot has managed to land a jet in Myanmar without front wheels after the landing gear failed to deploy. The flight landed at the Mandalay airport in Yangon. The Myanmar National Airlines said Captain Myat Mo Aung circled the airport twice to allow air traffic controllers to determine if the landing gear was down. He then followed emergency landing procedures and burned fuel to reduce the aircraft's weight before landing on its rear wheels. The nose touched the runway and the plane skidded before coming to a halt. None of the 89 passengers on board were hurt. In Yemen, Houthi troops have agreed to unilaterally withdraw forces from 3 key ports in Hodeidah, paving the way for political negotiations. The United Nations said the group has agreed to stop fighting and redeploy the troops within 4 days. The move is geared towards supporting a peace deal brokered in Sweden last December. Under the agreement, pro-government forces are also expected to withdraw before a second phase in which both sides pull back further. Government forces have expanded their ground offensive in northwestern Syria, pushing into the last rebel stronghold as calls for a ceasefire continue. The pro-government troops battled insurgents led by Al-Qaeda outside Miran Ghazal village in Idlib province. The government offensive has so far focused on areas at the southern edge of the rebel stronghold, resulting in further destruction and casualties. United Nations aid groups have suspended activities in the affected areas. Indians have voted in the second last phase of the country's general elections. Voters in Delhi and northeast and northern India have cast their ballots in one of the last phases of the vote, in which more than 100 million people are expected to participate. The election began on April 11th, will end on May 19th, and votes will be counted on May 23rd.
If the country functions well, then automatically the people's problem will be resolved. People's problems, I don't think they are as big as challenges a country faces as a whole. If the country is safe and secure, then its people are also safe and secure.
China is denying accusations that it is pressuring African countries to repay their loans or seize their assets. That's according to Tian Lin, spokesperson for the China International Development Cooperation Agency. Lin said interest-free loans has long been a part of China's policy in Africa. Last month, China canceled all interest-free loans it advanced to Ethiopia in 2018, as well as Cameroon's $78 million debt earlier in the year. We continue in China. The country has said it will not make any concessions in its trade talks with the United States. The Chinese trade negotiator Liu He said that trade talks with the U.S. would continue in Beijing, but warned there would be no concessions on important principles. Although Liu deemed the 2 days of talks productive, he said differences continue to exist, vowing that China was not going to make concessions on these matters. A Chinese economist also ruled out any effect on the country's economy as it relies more on domestic demands than U.S. markets.
China's economic development is unstoppable. It won't be disturbed too much if trade frictions continue. The impact is mainly on some of China's export industries, while our development has already gradually begun to rely on domestic demand.
For our last story, in Jamaica, the reggae group Overground Reggaelution released a song titled Hands Off Venezuela. The band joined the international community's call for non-intervention in Venezuela's affairs. The song also denounced the illegal blockade imposed by the U.S. Here's a bit of that song.
Mr. Donald Duck, yeah, got to tender now and hands off Venezuela, Mr. Donald Duck. We don't need no war, we don't need no war. You better stay far, stay far. Oh gosh, you ministers of war, oh no, you better stay far, stay far, stay far. We're eliminating poverty, standing up for humanity. This is the part of our history, God, in this time of reality. Oh God. Hands off Venezuela, Mr. Donald Duck.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can read more on these stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind the event?
Se despliega el tablero.
Uncritical moves. Investigates